Thank you everyone for joining us today. Today we have Daisy from U of I, we have Javier from CWI, and joining us this week is Darcy Peterson, Career Center at Bellevue High School. Welcome, guys.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
So today we're going to be talking about, we left off last week talking about family, so we're going to continue that. And I know family is a big contribution when it comes to making a decision what college to go to or whether to go to college. A lot of us don't have that support, or some of us do have that support. So we're just going to talk a little bit about that. So Darcy, last week we did mention what schools we went to. I don't know if you want to give us a little background about yourself.
Yes, I can. So I grew up in the metropolis of Weiser, Idaho. Graduated. Yes. I will be a Wolverine at heart for life. Graduated with 97 students. I was a fifth generation resident of Weiser. So my family had been there for a long time. And I am a first generation college student. My parents, my dad served in the military and then did one semester of college and realized that just wasn't his jam, and went to work for the Forest Service and then the Postal Service and retired from there. My mom also grew up in Weiser, and she went to college at Boise State College back in the day for a couple years. So she ran out of money and is still waiting to go back. How many ever years later. So she's kind of put that on the back burner, so to say. So she is a legal secretary, but they were both able to find decent jobs, not the highest paying without having a certificate or college education, but they knew for my sister and I that was going to be a little bit different. So as much as I can remember, my mom always said that her goal was for all of her children to go to college and graduate with a bachelor's degree. And so that I had that support and that expectation of my parents literally told both my sister and I, when you graduate, either you're going to the recruiting station or you're going to college. There was no in between. So Weiser is a pretty small town. There's not necessarily a whole lot of opportunity for just graduated students. So they wanted to make sure we saw the world and got out of Dodge for a little bit. And so at the time, I wasn't too sure about that. But looking back, I'm pretty thankful that I had this support and that my parents believed in the importance of education. Once I graduated from Weiser, I went to a community college in Eastern Washington called Big Bend, and I played volleyball and softball there. I did everything on my own pretty much. Our school counselors were super busy when I was in high school, and I was bound and determined to get this done and a little stubborn, so I didn't ask for help very often. So at Big Bend, I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I didn't think that there was actually a TRIO student support services there that I'd heard about. I didn't think I qualified. So I didn't even ask if I actually did or not. So I wish I would have, looking back. But I actually ended up spending an extra year there because I just randomly took classes and didn't look at what a transfer degree was going to need. So I spent a year just working, but it was my first year that I wasn't involved directly in athletics, and I actually got to coach softball for the first time that year, and that sent me on my path to where I am now. At the time, I was a nursing major, and it just wasn't working for me. So I switched to criminal justice, because that's related. And then I transferred to Boise State because my sister had just graduated from high school and was going there too. And I was ready to be back near family, and finished a degree at Boise State in physical education. And I started wanting to do athletic training too, but coaching and skill development was where kind of my jam. And so I really liked that. I ended up getting an associate's in criminal justice at Boise State as well because I had enough credits to do that. And so I had graduated with my bachelor's in December and knew there weren't many teaching jobs open. And so I stayed an extra semester, kept my cushy student job in the computer lab, and applied to 60 jobs in 9 states and ended up back in Weiser somehow as a college and career advisor in this brand new near peer program. And so that kind of started my education career and my passion for helping students, especially those that were in my similar situation and those from underrepresented populations. I've really found a passion for helping students get the same type of experiences that I got to have. So that initially led to me getting a degree from the University of Idaho in adult and organizational learning. Finally, I went to the right school, I know. And then I didn't have any real intention of staying at the high school level. I wanted to work at a college because I didn't think I'd still be working or liking working at the high school level, but I do. I've been fortunate to work with some really great people, all of which are right in this podcast right now. When I moved to Valley View 5 years ago, I spent 5 years at Weiser, and then 5 years ago I moved to Valley View. The district leadership approached me and asked me if I would be willing to go get a counseling degree, even though it meant another master's, just what it would take to get the licensure for Idaho. So they gave me some incentive, and lo and behold, that's where I am today.
That is an awesome recap of your school life. You touched on
I left out a lot of parts, like the 7 years it took me to get a bachelor's degree, but that's that's for another session. Yeah, that's a different life choices episode.
Yes.
The cool thing is today we have 3 vandals in the cast.
Yes, we do.
Always a fun time if there's a vandal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tried last time.
And 2 Broncos, because I'm like a Bronco and a Vandal-ish together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See? So, Javier, what was your family's approach?
When I was growing up, I always did, because I didn't have older cousins to kind of help and guide me, kind of like we talked about last episode, and kind of like the roles that were today. I kind of just did whatever I thought, like, was expected of a good student. So I took the AP classes. I was always in, like, advanced. Do you remember how they had, like, the advanced math or the advanced English classes? Like, for whatever reason, I started off in ESL when I was in kindergarten and probably first grade, but I was able to, pick up English rather quickly, and so I kind of just did what I thought was right, and so I did join Avid. I shared that last time, and then I joined the Trio Talent Search as one of those students. Once I got older, I was one of the first cousins in our family to kind of just get through the high school part. I would recommend that to my cousins. Same when I got to college, I was still trying to figure out college, right? But at the same time, soon after I started, and the years after, I had a bunch of cousins come to U of I also, or just start college somewhere else. And I remember I would have a lot of my aunts and uncles reach out and just say, hey, your primo is coming up. What do they need to do? Or can you tell us a little bit about... And, I'm still learning to navigate higher ed, and I hadn't completely grasped, like, what I was doing up there, but I was doing my best to kind of connect them to resources. Luckily, going through camp, I was able to refer some of my cousins through that program also, including my brother. And so that was just kind of like another support system for my family. But yeah, so my brother, right after me, he came to U of I, and then my siblings... we're 2 years apart, so there's 4 of us. 2 years later, or 9 years, it's about 9 years of difference between the 2 sets of kids.
Wow.
My little brother decided to do the trade route, so he got his CDL, and he's working for the Ada County District. And now he's actually transitioned to another position for electrician, and he's doing the electrical position, which is really cool. So what I was saying was my brother is going through the electrical apprenticeship program. His job is actually paying him to go through it and paying for it, and it's through CWI, which is really cool. And my sister didn't go to school right after, but she did. She is now in a farm tech program, and she's working as a paraprofessional, I think, for the Cabo School District. So they're on their way to kind of they're figuring out their own paths.
One of the things that I am the first one as well from my siblings to go. And one of the things that my parents always saw was 4 years colleges as being better than 2 years. So when I was planning on going to any college, my first choice was CSI. And that was mainly because I had received a scholarship. But there's a lot of pushback from my mom because everyone had always told her that 4-year schools were better. So she always wanted me to go to Boise State. Did any of you experience that?
I actually heard the opposite from some of my family members. They would say, isn't 4 years too long? Why don't you go for a shorter degree? And I know my cousins, especially the women in our family, got that a lot also. It's just been being further away from home and a longer period of time before you could actually start working. And so I don't know if anyone else has heard that.
I got kind of similar in different ways. Like my mom's siblings all went to college and finished. And when they found out I was going to a community college and that I was going for athletics, they were pretty much assuming that that's what I was going to major in. That's the only thing I considered. And I'm not going to lie, it was a big part of why I chose a junior college, because I did have scholarships to CFI and NNU that for another podcast probably would have been cheaper for me to go that route, but that's a whole nother episode. I kind of got, it wasn't outright pushback, but it was a little bit of, oh, you're going to a 2-year. And like I graduated in the top 10 of my class, which I mean, only 97 kids. So not as much competition. So I kind of encountered that a little bit as well.
DC, what was your experience when you were planning on going to college, and did you have that family support?
I want to say it was like a little bit of yes and no. Mostly yes, in the fact that, my parents wanted us to like continue on and do something for ourselves. They didn't want us to go and work in the fields. And so my dad always would take us to go pick cherries or like go work in the field. So we knew from the beginning, like he would show us like, this is not what you want for your future. Like, so if you want to do better, you need to do something else, like go to college. Or for him, the preference was to go to the Army. Like he found that, people that went into the Army didn't come out with a lot of debts, because I think that's like the number one thing in our community is that they hear all these negative things about how expensive college is, which is a reality, but I think they weren't educated on like scholarships and FAFSA, like they didn't know that was a thing. So I remember when I was a senior and I told my dad, like, hey, I need your tax returns because I need to do FAFSA because this is how I get free money. And he was just like, girl, you're crazy. Like, no one gives out free money. Like, that's not real. And I was like, I promise, this is a real legit thing. So, I mean, he always gave me a hard time when it was like going on trips, like with Trio, like he had to talk to my Trio rep. He had to see all the forms. I had to like translate them. Like, I mean, he really made me do work to prove that these were all college initiatives. So there was a little pushback in that area. And then also the fact that I chose U of I, which was definitely further away from home. And I think for them, I think it was just like the worry of not being able to be there for me in case of an emergency. And I think also the fact that they kind of saw me leaving as, losing their interpreter, their person to go to the bank, to go, to like doctor's visits that would translate for them. So that was a little bit of a concern for them. But I think, after going through U of I and, like much like to Javier's story, you bring along with you so many of your family members because then they see you as the expert. I mean, I also had a lot of cousins that graduated from high school, just not college, like didn't continue. So there wasn't really anyone to really look up to or to ask questions like, what's the process? What are the things that I should be like getting ready for? And so I love that now. I mean, I have a younger sister too, who's like 15 years younger than I am. And I mean, I love that our conversation is so different. Because for her, whenever she wants to go on a trio trip or she wants to go do something that has to do with like, student council, like she gets no pushback from my parents. Like they're very trusting that that's what she's doing and that's going to benefit her. So I love that the conversation, again, it changes, to where before for me it was, can I go to college? How am I going to do this? And for her now, it's not even a question that she'll go to college. It's where can I go to college? Where should I apply? Like there's so many options. So I love that, that has changed. And of course now, so many of my family members have seen the benefit of going to college. I think just seeing through me and maybe a couple others that have already graduated and we're doing something that we love, and that ultimately has changed the way that we live and also has benefited our families. So I think there are some things that, come with being the first one in your family to go into a university or a community college. But I think the outcomes are always, I think, a good realization for our families to see that, college is a good thing.
Yeah. Going back to, I know Stacy and Darcy mentioned this a little bit. You didn't feel like you had somebody to ask for help or didn't ask for help while in college. And I know I did that, and I actually did that in high school. I was in trio as well, as a trio student. But in my case, I felt like I knew everything. I'm a researcher, so I like to look up things. And I thought I knew like everything. I thought I had this like covered. But when I got to college, I realized, oh my gosh, like I don't know, like I don't have anyone to ask for help. I don't know half of the stuff. I don't really know what I'm doing here. Did you guys have that experience, or what was your experience like?
For me, I was kind of that researcher too, even with the slow dial-up internet back when I was in high school, with the G, and I had to ask my mom to use the phone line. But that was, I was driven by, I want to know how to do this, and I felt confident in what I found on the internet. But I also kind of felt it's like when I realized like I could have been part of trio and I could have had more help and it was okay to be helped. And my parents kind of emulated the strong, never need help types, because they both grew up, their dads passed away when they were children. And so they watched their moms be strong single parents. And I think that a little bit of that trickled down into my stubbornness, which still exists today, because I still struggle with that a little bit. And I think I had that same feeling as well, that I'd only ask for help when I absolutely couldn't find the answer on my own and wasn't confident in that.
I know for I guess all of us, we experience that with students. Like we have to try and get those questions out of them. And one of the things that I hear a lot is, well, I don't have anyone to ask for help, or nobody in my family has gone to college and I can't ask them. How do you guys work with students when it comes to that, and not just students but families as well, because a lot of times families have questions and they wait for usually the oldest of their kids to go and ask, and then they don't ask. So how do you guys reach out to those families and those students?
I think for me, it's being vulnerable and sharing your story. I think when they can relate to, hearing that, we had the same doubts. I mean, for me, when I was looking through, college and everything, for me, I struggled with asking for help. But I think it was mainly because I knew that if I started asking way too many questions, I think then my dad would question whether I was ready to do this. And so that was my fear, is like, if I don't know enough, he's not going to be supportive to actually let me go. And so like I share that with, with parents, saying like, it's okay to be afraid of the unknown, because I think for us, it's not always the fear of asking someone, it's the fear of not knowing what to ask. Like, what are the right questions to ask? And so I think just connecting with them first, sharing your story, sharing the same struggles that maybe they're probably thinking about right now, I think helps kind of start the conversation and just allowing them to know that it's okay, that you have all the time in the world to answer their questions. Because essentially as recruiters, that's something that, is our job, and we want to make sure that if they have questions, like they can contact us and not have that fear of like, oh, she's going to think this is a stupid question. Like, no, I think we all had those same questions when we were going through college. So I think that's always one of the things that I always try to like emphasize with working with my students and families. Like, you don't have to come to an office. Like, I will come to you if that's easier for you and in your comfort zone, in your language. Like, let's start there.
Yeah, I'll echo what Daisy said. So the vulnerability piece to kind of just be back on the same playing field as, because think about it this way really quick. When we were in elementary school, how much older did those high school students look? And then once we got to be high schoolers, what did those college age kids look like, right? And then adults. And so you're always like a step behind, thinking that the people ahead of you have like everything together when they don't. They're still figuring it out, right? And that's fine. So I like to share my story about how, even last episode I talked about when I cried because I was homesick, right? That's a funny story, but it's very real. And it was very real to me when it happened. And so it's just kind of breaking that down, letting students know, like, you might feel discomfort, you might feel homesick, push through it. It's totally worth it. The other piece I touch on is once you get to college, there's things set in place to help you be successful. And I think that's the part sometimes we forget. Some of our students, especially if they're first generation or if they have family members who are primarily Spanish speakers, there's always this doubt about their proficiency in English. And am I smart enough? And is my essay good enough? And are my friends gonna think I'm smart? Like, and honestly, like, all that is about like proving to yourself, but there's all this self-doubt. And so I always remind students, like, we have tutoring and it's free. I wasn't the best at math. And there is a math tutoring center where you can get support. And that's the thing too, like, you can do study groups. There's a lot of things set in place to help you be successful. Just take care of yourself. And one of the other things that we don't really touch on is the importance of mental health. And that's just another episode again, in therapy session with your counselor. But checking in on and just on yourself, making sure that you're okay with all the issues going on at home. With all the current doubt and stress you have now in times of uncertainty with COVID, there's all these external like pressures and forces that are making you feel a certain way. And so normalizing that and saying it's okay if you go through things, talk to a therapist, the school works with you. I feel like a lot of our students just drop out and they don't seek the help at the very end, and then it's too late. Had we been able to connect them with the appropriate resource, they might have gotten an extension on the semester. You know what I mean? They could have saved that semester. It wouldn't have affected financial aid. We would have had like way more options than what we have now. And so I do try to talk to students about the bigger picture in general, not just getting to college because that's the dream and the goal, but also all the mechanisms put in place to keep them there once we get them there. You know what I mean? And so I think that's comforting, and not only letting the students know, but their families. So when their student is a little too prideful or too proud to ask for help, mom and dad aren't, and they're going to reach out on your behalf and figure out some additional help for you.
Yeah, like both you, Daisy, and Javier said, it's about sharing a little piece of your struggle and making them realize that you're human just like them. From a school counseling perspective, you guys hit it on the head that we learn quite a bit in our programs that it's all about the relationships that you make with your students, and in turn the relationships you make with the students' families, and building a rapport, such as being vulnerable, talking about your own struggles, really can go a long way in helping. And especially, I know as someone that is white, I have always had everything in my language. I've never had to worry about that. And so for someone in my position, it's important to understand to seek out what those students that maybe you have a population that speaks primarily a different language. How can you help level that ground a little bit? And so I'm very thankful to Yvonne, who always translates everything I send her. So she just actually finished a translation for us today, a parent newsletter that is going to go out talking about financial aid, our SAT coming up, and it is getting emailed out to parents, which that's another level of availability and whatnot that we have to address because we can't mail things anymore. But that's also another episode.
I mean, I was gonna say, I think the biggest part is like we all have that like imposter syndrome. Like it's so common with all of us. I mean, you know, I mentioned I never asked for help when I was an undergrad, and I started exploring like the master's program. Again, no one in my family has a master's, so I was like, this time around, it's okay to, you know, myself to be vulnerable and say I don't know how to do this. I've never experienced or known anyone that has gone through this process, and so even that kind of I think helped me practice what I preach to my students is like, you know, you need to start somewhere. You need to like start building those networking things that are essentially going to help you as you go through this whole process. And so I think that's always one of the still one of my challenges is that, you know, there's those times that I'm like, am I smart enough to be in this program? Like, am I at the level of all these other people? Because I'm working on my MPA, and you know, when I see people that you know, when you do the introduction during syllabus week, and you know, you're the one student that's a first gen, but you have these like attorneys in your class, and you have these like, you know, city council and all these people in there, and of course it makes me feel like, oh my goodness, am I in the right degree? Should I look at something else? And so I mean, it's a little bit of that, and I think you always kind of carry it. But I think just reaching out and like talking to people that have gone through, you know, the process, even if it's, you know, a colleague or a friend, you know, I think it does help a lot. And to Javier's point, it's, you know, your mental state as well. To say, you know what, I'm struggling, I just need to talk to somebody, or I just need to like vent for a minute. Like it's okay to do something like that. I think it's just something that we need to get used to.
Yeah, for sure.
I completely agree. I felt the same way with my master's program. After I finished my bachelor's, I was like, I'm not smart enough. And I was supported through growing up, and I graduated in the top 10 of my class and all this stuff, but I just didn't think that I was good enough or smart enough. And then, like you said, I was like, I'm sitting here telling all these kids they can do all these things and go to med school and everything, and I'm not doing a dang thing. So, and then lo and behold, the bell just rang. Then I got into the program, and I had some of the same feelings too, but by the end I was like, okay, I belong here. But it's very, very difficult. That imposter syndrome is something else. I'm going to mute my mic while the announcements are.
Thanks, Darcy. What made you guys decide on the school that you're going to? I know, Daisy, you've talked a little bit about that, but especially for you guys that went up to U of I, went a little bit farther from school, were you fully supported in going so far from school? I only went maybe 2.5 hours from my home, and at that point my parents were supportive, but it was far, and for me it was far. So how did your family feel about you guys going so far?
Yeah, well, I'm actually the second oldest. I'm actually not the oldest. I have an older sister. She's like 2 years older than me. And so she had chosen to go to LCSC. And my parents were pretty supportive of her going there because, you know, she had the grades and everything. Of course, she fell in love when she was in college. She got married and had kids and dropped out. And so, you know, after just being there 1 year, my parents were like, if this girl wants to go to U of I, that's still another half hour further from us. Like, you know, they had a lot of fear that I would do the same thing. So again, like that's where like a lot of my pushback came, was like my parents were like, we just don't want you to do the same thing, you know, to have this big dream only to, you know, to them they felt like you're too young. We don't want you to get married at the same age as we did, you know, like you have like all this potential. So, I mean, it was a little harder, you know, for them to let go. But I think for me, I always fought for what I wanted. And so you know, there was times where, yeah, like there was arguments with my parents because they were just like, just don't go that far. Like you can go to a school that's like 20 minutes from home. But for me, I had to try to explain to them, like, this is the school that has the major that I want. It, encompasses what I picture and what I envision in a university. Like, this is my dream, and I want you guys to support it. So I think sometimes it's also, I'm not saying fight your parents, but fight for what you want. I think you really need to show them that this is something that's important to you, because I think when you let someone push you around or kind of manipulate the way that you think or the things that you want, I think you won't be happy at whatever school you go if it's not something that you truly want. And I think that was one thing that I had to tell my parents is, like, if I go to school here, like, I'm not going to get what I want from it. And the way I saw it was I wanted to go further away because I wanted to be independent. I always had that personality. But I felt that when I was at U of I, like, knowing that I was 6 hours away, like, to me, it just gave me kind of like that push to finish on time, because I wanted to go home, and I wanted, you kind of have that whole mentality of, like, I need to prove everyone wrong that, I can do this, that I'm in the right place, and then I'm going to do something with my life. And so I think for me, that was just kind of like the ultimate goal is, like, make it, go, and, do what I want, and be successful at it.
My side from attending U of I is that I did have a lot of support. So I found out I was going up there 2 days before school started, and that's how long my parents had to, decide if they were on board with me going or not. And my dad said, "Yeah, let's throw everything in the truck. We'll go up there." And they fully supported me. The one thing was, because I did have to work, that meant they drove me up, put all my stuff in the dorm, and they took off right away. And so I shared that last time, but it was a really great experience because, they said, your first year, don't work. They supported me financially. And like, I knew my parents supported me. I also knew that, I was trying to figure stuff out, and they helped as much as they can, even financially. I knew my family, didn't have a lot to give me at that point. But anything I did, even when it came time to joining student clubs or becoming a member of a fraternity, they were always there to support me in those decisions. Basically, their thing was, if you think it's good for you, then we think it's good for you, and we support you. And so it was really good to have them, like, support me in that way and give me extra confidence.
So one of the things that you've mentioned is the support financially. I know that was one of the biggest things that parents especially are looking at. I know for me that was a big thing, and at least for my family, and that was one of the main factors that made me decide as to where I was going to go to. When you guys are talking to families, I'm assuming that's one of the biggest issues that they have, or one of the biggest conflicts that comes up. What kind of advice, or what do you talk to with parents?
I think it always starts in educating them on what to expect each year that they're in high school. I think that's always an important factor, because I think if you share with them that, there's these scholarships, and that a lot of these scholarships are going to be based on academics, just letting them know, like, support your kids from an early age, like, be involved in parent-teacher conferences, even if you can't go to every single one of those. Like, when they come home with, like, good grades, like, encourage them, like, say, like, good job. You don't have to give them money or anything for good grades, but just showing them that you appreciate that they're trying, because I think that's kind of where it starts to encouraging them to continue on to college, because it is, expensive to go to school. I mean, that's number one thing that parents worry when they're looking at, supporting their kids to go to college. And then also letting them know, that there are ways to pay for school other than, student loans, that there's work study opportunities, that there's sometimes jobs on campuses that they can, take on a couple hours, that they work around your schedule. I think just giving them the peace of mind that there are resources out there. It's just a matter of, like, making sure that their student is, on top of it, and is encouraged to actually write out, whether it's like, a 1 or 2 page biography about themselves, because again, all these scholarships are going to ask those basic, same questions, like, what do you want to do? What have you been involved in? Because again, I think it's one of those things where parents sometimes don't understand that these extracurricular activities that their students do in high school, like, they have a lot to do with how they get scholarships later. And, coming from a family where you're expected to, stay home and babysit because, you're the oldest in the family, and you have to be there for when the younger kids get home, it's kind of the expectation. But I think just them understanding like, hey, it's okay for them to participate in, maybe a program like FHLA that does some community service, on weekends, that those are the things that help you get into school. So I think that's usually a big part, but also explaining, what student loans are like and how they are repaid. Because I think that's one of the biggest places where I think as a Hispanic community, we fail to explain that. Sometimes it is the language barrier between, those financial aid advisors and the parents, because sometimes I think they feel like they're blindly signing off to something that, they're not fully understanding. So I think, those are the parts where, at least for U of I, we have those Spanish speaking financial advisors so that, when they're going through this process, they understand what they're signing. And it's not that typical thing where you go to a clinic or, to the bank and there's no Spanish speakers and you're just relying on your 6 or 7 year old to translate, what the bank teller or the, the doctor's saying. I think education has a lot to do with helping them through the financial portion of college.
Yeah, at CWI we touch on that, and in fact, some of the events that I host are done in English and Spanish to inform our parents, because that's one of the big pieces, getting parents on board to just kind of learn about all opportunities that students have while they are in high school. One of the big things I always end up talking to parents about is make sure you're utilizing your career counselor, because they have a lot of scholarship opportunities for you, right? Yeah, Darcy, perfect segue into Darcy. Because unfortunately, and it's probably the case for Daisy too, parents and students are coming to us right before school starts, says, what scholarships can I be applying for? And the reality is like, well, most have already passed, but as we begin to look at the year after, you want to start applying between these time frames, and these are the scholarships. And it's always sad to kind of bring that up, but there's always payment plans. There's always there's a lot of options in terms of if you don't have enough money, then what are the options? But we always want to make it to the point where we're telling students and their family, no, you're getting money back. You're actually making money to go to college. And that to me is that is one of the favorite things to say. Like when families are like, oh, getting money back. You're making money to come to college. And so
I think he agrees with you.
I'll add into that. I wish I had more conversations with parents, kind of like Javier said, that sometimes and even Daisy touched on it a little bit, sometimes the parents get really involved right at the end process and haven't necessarily seen what's gone into before. So we've always tried to find more ways to engage more parents. And I do have conversations like at parent-teacher conferences or when we make appointments and students bring in their parents to complete their FAFSA. And we have those conversations then. And we try to be proactive with newsletters, but quite honestly, if I had 2 kids and I was trying to keep them clothed and fed and taken care of during the pandemic, I don't know that I'd open my email from a career counselor necessarily. So, but it's just trying to get folks more invested in the process and really, like you all do, educate on the fact that, it isn't scary, despite what Forbes and MSNBC and all this say, that there are ways to finance education, and education is still very relevant for our kids. But I do have some interesting conversations here and there. My biggest one that I hear, oh, we don't qualify for FAFSA. And I kind of want to say, well, no one qualifies for FAFSA technically. You just do the FAFSA. But it's actually a conversation I had with Avid seniors today, is that it's just that education on that FAFSA piece. They think just because they make a certain amount of money that they aren't going to qualify. So it's really, like you both said, comes down to the knowledge of the process.
And like I said earlier, I was the one that thought I knew everything. I never asked questions. I was like, why are you talking to me? But just know that we there's people like us that we do this because either we didn't have somebody like Darcy was saying, she didn't have that support at the school. My parents were there to help me. They just didn't know how. So I know that's another thing is you might have that support at home. They just don't know how to support you. And that's something else that we can definitely help out with.
Well, I think to kind of add on to what you said there about it's kind of one of those things that if you want it to happen, don't be afraid to tell other people about it. Because I know some kids, it was actually my last year at Weiser, they just had started an alternative school at Weiser, which it was a very needed thing. But I was chatting with a student, and they were afraid to say that they wanted to become an RN. So alternative high school student, not a traditional home where they came from, Latinx background. Their grandparents were immigrants. Their parents had grown up in Weiser and stayed and had never gotten out. But this student was kind of almost embarrassed that they wanted to become a registered nurse and go to college and get a bachelor's degree in nursing. And so that kind of opened my eyes a little bit to the fact that some kids kind of put up a facade sometimes that they might not be interested in the career exploration activity or what a representative has to say because they don't want to displease someone at home, or it's just not something that's been, but it might be there deep underneath. So I think a lot of what we all do is kind of when we make those connections with kids, we can help them break down those walls. And if they don't have that support at home, and then this student just graduated last year with their bachelor's in our nursing.
That is awesome.
They went through the TVCC program. So, and it actually, and it's funny that you mentioned the parent side because the student's mom actually went back to school with her, even though it hadn't really been a priority. So I don't know how the mom's doing at this point. I've just talked to the student, but she graduated last year, passed her boards perfectly, has a job, works in the healthcare setting in Ontario. And so I'm like, oh, hey, this is why I do this.
And it's going to be her helping out her mom through the questions and the issues.
Yeah.
So it's really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And her mom, I had unfortunately known because my mom works for a law office in Weiser as well. So that's how I had actually met their family first, was helping in my mom's law office before she was my student. So the mom found that inspiration from her kid.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just kind of touching base on students not having, I guess, the support when it comes to what they should be studying. Do you guys see that a lot, families? Like, at least for myself, like, I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but I realized that was because my parents wanted me to be a teacher. And I was always kind of pushed towards that direction. Do you guys see that a lot when talking to students? Like, they want to do something, but parents want them to be a doctor or a lawyer.
Yeah, I actually lived that. My parents wanted me to be a nurse. Oh, you'll make so much money. Never mind the fact that I get attached to a person the second that I meet them. And so if something not great were to happen to them, that could damage my mental health a little bit, which I thankfully figured out for myself. And that's why I'm on the opposite end. But yeah, that I experienced that myself, and I actually try to share that with kids quite a bit to just give them that little bit of confidence to think outside maybe the influence of what their family says they might need to do. I don't know if I'm great at it, but I try.
I was gonna say, I think it's okay for them to like reach out and be and like find a mentor. I think like that's one of the things that's it's really helpful, especially when you have maybe someone trying to influence your decision on what you should study. Because I think ultimately, if you don't have a passion for what you're doing, I think that's where I see some students kind of failing classes because they're not really into the topics or subjects that they're studying. And I think when you do find a passion for something that you love, like the material comes easy to you. And so I think that's always my advice to students is like, do what really, really makes you happy. I mean, as cheesy as that sounds, like that's what's going to help you be successful. And, you know, sometimes the careers that you think aren't going to help you make money ultimately are the ones that do. Because I think there's people that become experts or become, you know, a mentor to a certain group or guest speaker, you know, whatever it is that, you know, helps another student. And I think sometimes even high school students can be mentors. I mean, you know, when I talk to a student that maybe has never heard about TRIO, I say, you know what, don't just take yourself to TRIO, like invite your friends, take them with you, like invite them to all of these things that you're doing, let them know about scholarships that you're applying to, because that's kind of like uplifting another student and you're possibly, you know, changing the future of not only them, but for their families as well.
And then one of the things that like I kind of was thinking about was like a lot of students, especially ones that have had parents who have attended college and have like, you know, those doctor, orthodontist, optometrist degrees. You always see usually a lot of those kids like stepping into the same roles as their parents and they do it rather quickly. And so when I have students that are, you know, trying to put themselves into law school or that's one of their dreams and it takes them longer than, you know, it took someone else because, you know, students compare themselves to each other. It's saying, you know, unfortunately, like, yeah, maybe you don't have that same direct support or line of direction like that student has because their parents been through it. Money's probably not an issue. Like they know who to talk to. They know all the steps. You know, that's okay. Like you take the time to figure that out. A lot of times it's about the journey, you know, and how much you'll get to grow and experience, you know, life. And you might have other opportunities that student didn't get to have because, you know, you're figuring that out on your own. And so talking to people about that is
Darcy, so we have a question for you. What's the best way for students to connect to their student or their career counselor?
So if a student goes to a high school that is lucky enough to have a career counselor or a college and career advisor, hopefully they have at least been able to be in a presentation where that person was and introduce themselves. If not, the best first step is to go to their school counselor. So every school should have a school counselor, whether the process is to show up at the office or if they're remote learning right now, emailing their counselor and seeing if they can set up an appointment with that school counselor to talk about who that college and career advisor is or the contact information for the career counselor or college and career advisor. And one thing to remember is the college and career advisor or career counselor, whatever position that you have at your school, if you're lucky enough to have both, they don't expect you to know everything right away. We kind of talked about that already. It's okay to be vulnerable with them, to ask any questions. I always tell my students no question is stupid. There might be some silly ones, but we might giggle a little bit, but we're giggling with you. Because there is some interesting, I mean, it does feel weird to ask some questions because kids don't want to seem stupid at all. And truly they're not. It's just that they haven't been educated necessarily in the lingo or done career exploration even. So unfortunately, it takes a little bit of willpower, a little bit of courage on the student's part, but they truly have to become their own self-advocate and seek out that person sometimes. And then once they do, just start building that relationship. Can I come in every week and ask questions? Can I email you when I have questions? And that person should be kind of their contact for what they need to do if they're freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And then hopefully they get the chance to be part of events or presentations in their classes. Another, if the student has a hard time finding those folks, is just having that conversation with your teachers, a teacher that you trust. And then usually what that teacher does, and sometimes that happens here even, a student isn't aware. We have a career center, and then teacher has a conversation with them. The teacher emails us and says, I had this conversation with this student. So it's kind of like a referral, and they pass it along to us. So there's a lot of help out there. You just have to take that sometimes really courageous first step to get the ball going.
Yes, and to follow up on that, even if you know or you think you know everything, it's still helpful to get some second opinion, get some information on that. Just clarify with your counselors. Things changed last minute, as we can all see. So it's very helpful to just have somebody as a resource and to help you out and have as a backup. Just to finish off, just wanted to say if you guys could tell us a little bit about what it was like for your family that moment you graduated.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, anytime I look at that, there's a picture I have where I graduated, and it was at the U of I, that football field, right next to the Kibbe Dome. That's where usually all the grads come out, and then you take all the pictures out there. But every time I look at that picture, I just was like, man, what was I thinking? Because I looked kind of weird. Just like those old pics, you know what I mean? Like, but I just remember, so obviously, like, everything that it takes to get through a degree is hard work. It really is. So all the emotional turmoil, all like the family issues, right? Because you have those still as you're a college student, all your personal issues, the classes, it all culminates into that one moment of like, I'm done. I did it. You know what I mean? And so I just remember, but I had stumbled out there, because you don't even sit by friends when you graduate. You just sit with like whoever they make you sit by. So I'm walking out, looking for people I know, and there's some people I see. And so you're saying hi and you're waving, and it feels cool. But I just remember like coming into the middle of the field and kind of just looking around. And the very first person I saw was my mom, just like from a distance. She was coming out to meet me with the rest of my family, but she was like at the front. And I just remember looking at her and her looking at me, and then her eyes got all watery. And then I choked up, right? And but she still has to walk like probably 5 minutes to get to me. So like all emotional, choked up myself in the middle of the football field. But it was like a really cool moment, you know what I mean? Because she like saw me and just validated like everything that I thought and how I felt, and I was like, it was totally worth it. And so it was a really, really good feeling. And I can't imagine what that will feel like with the Masters. I know Daisy's gonna feel that soon. Right, but that's goals also for me. And so anyways, that was a cool little moment. Obviously my whole family came out. We hugged, we took pictures. It's really special, and it really means a lot. So for folks who don't get to have graduations, be they college or not, it's a little sad, because it is a big opportunity to kind of just celebrate in that, for that moment, for everything that you've been able to accomplish. And so that's my story.
Like, just kind of like going back to what Javier said, like you're sitting like around people that you wouldn't like choose to, right? Like you're grouped by your college. And I just remember that, like, for me, being a College of Business graduate, like there isn't a lot of Latinos that graduate with that degree, because back then U of I had this like really intense business program that you had to go through in order to graduate. So a lot of, people would get discouraged because it was so difficult. But I just remember, like, when I was sitting there, I think it wasn't necessarily for me, because I think part of it, I felt like it was similar to when I graduated high school, but I thought it was different because I knew that for my parents, this was the first time they were sitting down, like full of people that looked nothing like us. And, they were experiencing that moment for the first time. So to me, that was just kind of like, I think I was more emotional for them than I was for myself at that point. Because I think ultimately, like, in your mind, you're always thinking, like, I'm doing this for my family. Like, I'm the first one to graduate with a degree. Like, how cool is it that they're experiencing this? And they're like, my kid is out there with all these people that, probably there's doctors and lawyers in the auditorium, but My daughter's down there too. So I think for me, that was kind of like the moment of like, this is all paying off. All those like late nights and final exams, like, you know, they were worth it. And I think now that I'm working on my master's and I'm going to be done in the spring, like to me, that's just like the one moment that I'm like, okay, no one in my family has experienced this yet. So it's definitely going to be a big moment. And I cannot wait until they give me that bash of a master's. So we'll see. Excited for that one. Because it's definitely been the most difficult.
For me, it was kind of interesting. So I walked for my associate's degree at Big Bend because it was my final one there. And then I walked for my bachelor's at Boise State. And I have that picture in my desk of my family. And it's actually one of the few pictures I have of my dad smiling because he just made a joke right before it was taken. He's like in pictures. So he just doesn't smile often. So I want to believe that part of it was because was the relief that I finished. My parents were much more confident than I in my ability to finish, and my family was. My sister had been at Boise State for a couple years at that time too. My most emotional one was actually my University of Idaho master's degree. And I walked in the Boise ceremony, which I have been to a few U of I graduations, and I can contend that, oh Lord, that's crazy. But at the same time, the Boise one was a little more intimate, and I actually looked in the eyes of the president when I got my degree and shook his hand. And so my mom, my dad wasn't able to come because of work, but my mom was in full tear mode with that one because my parents, like a lot of people, live vicariously through me and my sister. And so she never got to finish her degree. And so it was to see me get that master's degree. And I was living with them at the time, so they really understood the hard work that goes into it. And so I think they were maybe a little more appreciative of me finishing that one, maybe than my bachelor's, because I was always gone and they didn't see as much. So I think that's another kind of factor too. But at the same time, the bachelor's, my mom got teary-eyed then too, because she was one of two on that goal. So
I would tell you guys mine, but I'd probably start crying. So
You gotta end on a good note.
but it's such a great accomplishment, and all that hard work that you put into, especially whether it be high school or college, it's so worth it at the end.
Yep.
And your whole family can see that. And if you don't have that support system at home, just know that there's lots of people. I know I have students that I watch them graduate, and I'm so there for them, and I'm so proud of them. So, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way. Just to end it there before we all start crying. Thank you guys for being here today. Hopefully next week we are able to continue our conversations, and hopefully you guys can join us. Bye, guys.